we're back downstairs working on the Jose 50 watt amp. As always, brought to you by 3 Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedal boards. DC, 1/4 inch, RCA for your home stereo and car stereo. Check us out, 3monkeyssolderless.com. All right, so where we last left off, we had prepped the chassis, right? So we had gotten the chassis out. We had drilled in the extra tube socket. We put in the jump switch, added a ground, put in the board mounting locations. So now it's time to basically, I'm going to mount, or rather put the wires on the board, right? Use the board. Start building out the board. All right, so what we got is a jig here, which I use, which I developed while making the prototype of this. So this allows me to make each one of the amplifiers identical in terms of their lead lengths, and which then leads to a very consistent RF signature, so that all the wires are the same lengths, they have the same sort of interaction with one another, and that the amplifiers can be consistent as possible from one to the other. Also aids in sort of repetition in terms of making sure that, you know, you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. So you mount the board on here and then basically feed your wires in, and then you will have everything where you need them to be. So the first thing, let me make sure I'm in there. The first thing I'm going to do basically is just start wiring on the top of the board. I'm going to put in the various, let's say, leads of wire for your B-, your B+, bias, grounds, feedback, things like that. Things that go on top of the board, and then we'll do all the wires that would go out to the pots and then to the tube socket. So let's start. I'm gonna fire up the soldering iron, get my solder. I'm running low on that. We're gonna need to order some more of that stuff forthwith. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to work on the bias area, which is right here, right in this general vicinity. So we're gonna connect our grounds with this bus wire. So I'm gonna wrap it around. Gotta get my tools. There we go. So these are the ground sides for the bias supply. Then we're going to do our feedback. Okay, got that side done. Now we're gonna need to do our lead here. Oh. This is again bias network here. Okay, so that would be it for the bus wire. Now we can start going through the rest of the area and put in our wrap on every one of these. This is going to make it very roadworthy. I'm going to put a little mark where I want to strip that. All right, so this is basically probably talked about this before, but this is like the mil-spec way of building things so that they last for a long time, you know? Have you ever noticed how many amplifiers from the 50s and 60s and even early 70s are still around and functioning great, but how many dead amps from the 2000s on there are? And that's basically because of the build, right? How are they built? What methodology are they using? Are they going like this? Well, no. To my mind, in my knowledge, there are no real modern production amplifiers that go to this length in terms of build, you know, quality, that they go to mil-spec lengths. This is the way that the radios during World War II, Vietnam, Korea were built. They'll suffer a lot of pain before they fail. So that's what I'm trying to do here, is build things as bulletproof as possible, right? No circuit cards, printed circuit traces, Molex connectors, things that are flimsy at best. You know, we don't like flimsy. So we continue on. So this is your bias network. Now we're going to start running the B plus down. Use this wire. All right, so we go from here. So what you have here is a good mechanical connection in addition to a solder. I mean, there are some ways you can do what I like to call a hybrid kind of board. So like in Three Monkeys, developed something that was similar to this. So it had a minimum of traces on it, but mostly it was a produced board that would allow for a combination of turrets, or eyelets rather, and minimum traces. But it just skipped provided a little less labor, a little labor saving in that I didn't have to drill and stake every single board, that we would get these. I kind of gamed the system, I guess. I kind of had a company make these eyelet boards by making very thick G10FR4 boards with double thick traces on them, through hole plating. So in a sense, I was having them make me eyelet boards. So that was kind of, I thought, a decent idea for how to build, you know, maintain military spec type builds while also taking advantage of some production, right? Some production aspects. So I'm just pretty much doing by memory, you know, where everything's supposed to go, and trying to talk at the same time, which is kind of difficult sometimes. You kind of lose your train of thought, or you lose your idea of what you were doing. And then you have to regain your position, as well as try to remember what you were blabbing about. Here we go. Get up in there. Okay. So this wire here is going to the filter can, which would be under the board. So I'm gonna cut it extra long so it can span 2 turrets. So that's how it's kind of connected. And then I'll have, like here already marked out, you know, where it should go. So I have here the mark for that. So this is this one. And now we can, get this out of there. Kind of fell off the reel and got wound around itself. There we go. We don't like it when that happens. So smush it back over. There we go. This is the other one for the can. Then we can continue moving down the board. Yeah, I'm gonna have to order some more solder post haste. Pretty much used it all up. I remember there was a time, say back around the early 2000s, 20 some odd years ago, where ROHS was starting to be, well, it was sort of like the beginning of when the European Union started to gain momentum. And inside of that union was formed new directives for the production of consumer electronics. And part of those directives, or one of those directives, was what was called later RoHS, or ROHS, the Restriction of Hazardous Substances. So that meant that materials that the EU governing body determined to be toxic or, let's say, less friendly to the environment, or for whatever reason undesirable, were going to be phased out of any goods that were involved or imported into the European Union. And other countries that were not part of the European Union, specifically that would be America, would be a signatory, in a sense, to the convention. So the United States would also follow RoHS. So lead turned out to be one of the biggest factors in RoHS, right? That lead was to be phased out. I mean, you could still use plutonium. You could still use, you know, any kind of like extremely toxic substance in, you know, the production of, you know, modern technology, phones and batteries and things like that, cadmium, you can use all that to your heart's extent, but lead you couldn't use. So there was a big panic going through like the amp building community at that time about what are we going to do, because we're not going to be able to get solder anymore, and that you're going to have to sell anything be what they called ROHS certified. And let's continue on with this build while I yap. So anyway, the thought or the panic or the threat maybe was that at a certain point in the near future, your shop would have to become ROHS certified. And that would mean, what is this here? Okay, I gotta get some more water. That would mean that a governing agency's inspector would come to your shop with specialized tools to make sure that your shop itself wasn't contaminated with any of the evil substances that were to be used or that were going to be used or to build amplifiers or whatever that were sort of phased out and banned. So they would do things like take your tools and test them to see if there was any lead. And they were going into like the parts per million was the fear that where it was going to end up at. Like literally parts per million is where you would kind of have to live. And that scared everybody. They thought, you know, there's zero chance that any of us are going to be able to, you know, we're going to have to throw away our benches. We're going to have to throw away all our tools. We're going to have to, you know, probably move the shop out because they'll find lead on the walls or they'll find it, you know, because when you start to turn up your test equipment pretty high, you could find lead in, you know, in the Arctic. So I don't know whether, you know, it's really meaningful what the results would be, but not really paying attention to what I'm doing. So it was like, what are we going to do for solder? So then there was high temperature solder. That was the ability that you would have to use surface mount components that would use a wave soldering machine with silver solder. Then there was conductive glue. There was all this stuff that everybody was kind of figuring that they were going to have to, that they were going to have to start to figure out a way to integrate into their builds. And as with everything in the government, it turned out that most of that was going to end up being self-reporting. So you just had to certify in a way that wasn't even, let's say, legally binding, that none of your products contained anything that they thought was bad, and that it met what they called CE, and that you could go on from there and just on your merry way. And all you had to do was kind of attest to it. There was no teeth to the law in the end. There was no real way of enforcing the law. Now, granted, a lot of parts, you know, ended up being end-of-lifed because they may have had a lead sort of component to them. But really, the whole thing kind of just went away, which I thought was somewhat hilarious, but expected in a way. So a lot of hemming and hawing, a lot of wasted time, a lot of, you know, fears that this industry would be doomed to the dustbin because we used, you know, things that some people thought were less than desirable. That's not long enough. And in the end, it just turned out to be a bunch of hooey. So there's a story for you. Like everything else, I think it was just a way for some people to get a job in the end. You know? They could become, you know, paper shufflers in the ROH bureaucracy. ROHS bureaucracy. All right, we continue on. All right, we got our feedback wire. Feedback is purple. If I could find the end of the purple, that would be a miracle. All my stuff has come undone as usual, and I have a giant mess to contend with. There's the end of the purple, but it's all unwound now on itself. As you can see, I've created a gigantic conflagration of wire. Let's get this green out of the way, and then maybe we can put all this purple back on this spool and kind of half-ass it. So we don't have a complete catastrophe here. I mean, why make these spools so small for so much wire? It just seems like they're trying to make my life difficult. All right, continuing on. Who knows what other ridiculous stories we'll come up with as we build this Jose. So I thought that blues breaker came out like ridiculous. Probably haven't heard the last of that, but the sounds were just off the chart. I felt kind of was nice to be back making something like JTM 45-ish. It's kind of cool to get to that sort of part of, I mean, that's where I sort of started with all this. It was back in the back in the 90s, doing blockheads, building split fronts, 63, 62, 64, 65s, building blues breakers, building copies of Black Flags, building early 100 watters, like, you know, the Malcolm style amplifiers, JTM 100s basically, building the custom 50, which I really like doing, which was sort of like my own sort of like mod for a Marshall. Really had a lot of fun doing all that. So getting back into that was kind of like a trip down memory lane. Seems like yesterday doing that. And it's like more than 25 years goes by and it feels like it's yesterday. Crazy. I found some of this wire that's been here, some really nice top coat tin, so I want to use it up for the build. It's basically the same as this, but it was just like the last bits of it and I kind of just put together, and I was like, I should, so I've got to use up what I have before I start using what I just got. That's what it always seems like. So I got all this again, and it's, you know, the same wire. Sometimes the jackets look like different colors because I think their dye jobs are a little different from time to time. But I just should use this up, because I'll get spools of like this, you know, I'm not going to leave this on a spool, whatever the 5 feet of wire that's left. So I end up just wrapping it around my hand and then sticking it in a box, and then I'm like, oh, I'll just start using this. Which I shouldn't do. It was wasteful. So we're using this wire. So there's some talk about reissuing the Sock Monkey and doing a limited run of the Sock Monkey, which was 3 monkeys, probably best-selling. Was a little amplifier, a combo amplifier. Was also available in a head form. And it was a hot rodded, hang on a second. It was a hot rodded, like mini AC30, AC15. There was some departure from it. There was, you know, a lot of my own sort of like, you know, cookie recipe in there. So, you know, it wasn't exactly AC15-ish. But it was the EL84 amp, It had like the ability to give you some really good drive. It had like, you know, an added gain stage that was available through a switch to give you really hot rodded tones. It had a master volume on it, a post phase inverter master. And the thing just, there's, you know, the people, they don't come up for sale very often because all the people have them pretty much hold on to them. It just sounded really good. So we've been thinking about reissuing them because we've been getting a little bit of here and there some requests for them, and I thought it would be nostalgic to go sort of like with a 10-year anniversary sort of like amp. Something, although Three Monkeys has been around for longer than 10 years, it's more like we're probably closing in on a 20-year that we've been, I can't believe that. In a few years, it'll be 20 years of Three Monkeys. So thanks to everybody for keeping Three Monkeys out there. It's been really cool to do all that. So yeah, so we're thinking about doing that. So we're gonna start doing some prototypes. It's gonna look a little different, which you gotta do. Because, you know, you don't want to sort of make it exact, like in terms of cosmetics. All right, we're going to change some of the cosmetics, and it'll have some of that Three Monkeys flair to it for sure. You'll be able to tell it's a Three Monkeys without question by looking at it. And they're going to sound like Three Monkeys amps. So I'm kind of excited about maybe doing that. Hopefully we can get those wiring done inside of our... So trying to keep these videos down to like an hour. I like doing marathon videos, but it's just the upload time is ridiculous, and you know, we could do a 6-hour video of me just sitting here wiring all day. So we're also going to be building the last of the Marshmallow, the ones. It's just hard to get like some of the parts. I have all the transformers, I mean I have, which are the most important part of the whole deal for that particular sort of amp. It's everything else that seems to be hard to get right now. So I'm kind of building what I can. So right now, if there was an opportunity for me to build, to get enough parts together, I found, to build one of these Jose's. So I'm like, it's on, got to do that, right? And I haven't built one of these in months. So I think it was time to put one out. And then once the ones are finished, obviously we're going to have, you know, the Three Monkeys thing probably coming out one day. But there's a couple more interesting amplifiers that I have on the plate that are sort of like, you know, more specialized to our quests that we have here. You know, oops. See, I'm talking and I already made a mistake. This one here, I'll straighten it back out again, goes through here. There we go. Yeah, that works. Now this one doesn't do anything. If my memory serves me correctly. This one's just left open because this is where we start using shielded cable. And this one as well we're using shielded cable for. So at this point, we just got to do the two cathodes, I think. Okay, I think we're done with this side. Let's just double check everything. Ah. This is the bias again. But the AC supply for the bias, there we go, is derived from the high volts. There we go. All right, so let's double check everything. Everything looks right. All right, so now we can turn this wiring jig around and we can come to the other side and start wiring from here. All right, so we're gonna need This one's open. We don't use that. So then we have here just buzzing right along now, trying to make the time, trying to get this all done before we hit the hour mark. I don't think we're going to run out of solder today, so that's a good thing. We're definitely running out of solder this week, though. So we might do a video on that, on this next thing. So we might see the most toured, road-worn sock monkey in the history of sock monkeys coming in to the shop for just a tune-up. So this particular amplifier belongs to Bobby Schneck, who, you know, done so many things. So he played with Slash, with Miles Kennedy, played in Aerosmith when Brad was down for a few shows, teched for them, teched for all different kinds of people, was in the Navy on top of that. But he has a sock monkey that I swear looks like he went to work on it with a sledgehammer. Thing still works, no problems, but it is beat up. So you're gonna we'll probably do a quick health check of the thing. And what am I doing here? All right, do a health check of the thing and maybe retube it. The transformer looks like it's hanging on, but probably needs to be retorqued down. We may actually take the whole thing nearly apart so that we could get all our grounds. Because he lives in Florida a lot. And when you gig too with amplifiers, you get a lot of corrosion, or the potential for corrosion, being that the amps sometimes will be going off of a hot stage into a cold truck, coming off a cold truck into a hot stage, and they'll get some condensation going on the metal parts, right? So there's a good opportunity for there to be like some corrosion, and then throw in salt water, salt air, and then you got a recipe for that. So a lot of the grounds, when he sends me an amplifier, that's like the first thing that I want to do. What am I doing here? I've kind of lost track of where I was going with this. I don't think I need to do this particular one here. I think this one is part of the Jose Master. See, that's what you get for talking while you're trying to do stuff. You forget where you are in time and space. Give me a hold of that. There we go. All right, so that's off. Right, because the treble control from the Jose Master, we go to that. And I'm looking at it upside down, and I was talking about Bobby. So yeah, so when I get an amplifier from him, the first thing I want to do is basically redo all the grounds on the amp. Take all the star grounds out, drill out the rivets, take some steel wool, get to work on the chassis, right where the solder tab is that's holding it down to the chassis. Put in a fresh ground tab, resolder everything in there, take the potentiometers out, clean behind them, get some new lock washers on them. You know, there's a lot of grounding that's done there. Get some new lock washers on them, and then so they can get a good bite, clean the metal, and then they can get a good bite into the chassis, and then you're going to have you know, a better ground and a stronger performing amplifier. So we're going to do a lot of that. We'll retube it, we'll rebias it, we'll just give it, you know, tighten down what needs to be tightened down and get it into top performing shape for him so we can continue his touring with it. He said the thing's fallen off of the stage, or fallen off the the cabinets several times. Still fine. So that's what I like to try to do, is try to, if I can, try to make something that is going to be able to withstand that kind of abuse. So those sock monkeys, if Bobby can use it, I think anybody can. There we go. All right, we're almost done. Take the wire out of the way for a minute. Now I'm going to examine, make sure that everything is where it should be. Get this little scrap of wire out of there. Come on, get out of there. All right, I'm going to lay it down so I can examine everything, so we are good. Yep, okay. That's good. The camera got full. I had to empty the recently deleted. So I was just checking my work here, and then I heard the bink and it went off. So apologies for the jump cut. All right, so where was I? I was somewhere around here. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. So we have all our wires out. The only thing we got to do next is to populate the board with the components. So I think that's good enough for today, and we got a lot done. So we'll continue the build next time. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.